He also says corporal punishment once, which I don't know if you know the difference between capital punishment is when you're killed. Corporal punishment is when you get a spanking or get the strap, as there was when I was in elementary school. He mentions treason and China, and he hates the liberals. So it's a bit of a rant and extremely rude. Here's George Chahal tweeting about it again, referring to Susan Delacourt talking about death threats. He says, Susan Delacourt is spot on. Threats like these are a regular occurrence. It's almost starting to feel normal. But politicians, their teams, and their loved ones should never have to experience this. Homegrown hatred is growing, and we need to fight back. What do you mean by fight back, George? I mean, call the police? That's a good idea, but I don't think that's what he means. I think he means censorship of critics, including rude critics, and demonizing non-liberals as extremists or terrorists. Here, let's watch a little bit. This is from a CTV News story that, frankly, could have been written by Chahal himself.
A Calgary politician is giving a glimpse into the abuse and vitriol he and his staff received from callers. Liberal MP George Chahal recorded voicemails left at his Calgary office spewing hateful, racist, and homophobic slurs against him, his family, and staff. Tyson Fedor reports.
Get out of my country, you rat, bro. Liberals are a bunch of traitors. Hope you all die.
It's just one of more than a dozen voicemails from one man aimed at Calgary Skyview MP George Chahal.
Hey, I just wanted to say that stupid, ugly that deserves to be exterminated. The Liberal Party are a bunch of traitor just like you, and I hope your entire family dies, you ugly.
A compilation of racial, homophobic death threats and personal attacks aimed at him, his family, and staff at his Calgary constituency office in the span of one evening.
It's deeply concerning that folks are using this bigotry and hate speech to target politicians like myself.
The unidentified caller's voicemails were posted to Chahal's Twitter Friday night, outlining the abuse he has received since jumping from municipal to federal politics, calling him a rat, the N-word, and using homophobic slurs. The man wishes death on all liberals.
Well, this is the worst I've seen over the last few years, and the level of hatred and discrimination towards elected officials. And it's got to stop.
Okay, it's interesting. Why publish the voicemail with all that vitriol? Why do that? Why not go to the police? He said in his tweet it was from the other day. No, it actually turns out it was from months ago. He said it's a regular occurrence, but it's the same one guy. And what was the death threat again, besides saying you deserve to die? That's not a death threat. All of this was from one man, and I do not support that one man, whoever he is. But it turned into a press conference and a news story. All right, well, let's bring in an expert to help us think, because we don't know what to think without an expert to tell us. What is this expert in? Well, he's just an expert. It's Keith Brownsey. He's a political science professor. I don't mind Keith Brownsey, but he says this is a crime, a hate crime. Here, take a listen.
One political expert is unsure what fuels vile speech of this magnitude, but admits it may result in criminal charges.
That type of language is hate speech, and it can be prosecuted. It's also criminal harassment. I mean, he's threatening to kill people.
Hey, George, just a reminder, you're an ugly trash traitor.
Keith Brownsey says a distaste from Albertans towards Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Liberal politicians only represents a fraction of the population.
Maybe 25% of the population has this visceral disdain for the Liberal Party, but the rest of the population just doesn't care.
Listen, I'm against harassing phone calls, and luckily they don't happen too often in the era of caller ID and eminently traceable calls, but is this actually a hate crime? Now, I don't think Professor Brownsey's a lawyer, so I forgive him, I suppose. And maybe it's a minor point, but contrary to what Professor Brownsey says, the criminal code provision against hate speech is a little more complicated. It only applies when you communicate to a third person, as in you publicly say something about him to him, and not just when you say something mean to a guy himself, and it has to be likely to cause some sort of disturbance. Here, let me quote from the law itself, Section 319 of our criminal code. 319.1. There's several paragraphs, but they're all very similar. Everyone who, by communicating statements in any public place, not some guy's private voicemail, incites hatred against any identifiable group where such incitement is likely to lead to a breach of the peace, is guilty of an indictable offense, is liable to imprisonment for a term of exceeding 2 years, or an offense punishable on summary conviction. And that's just called the willful promotion of hatred. There are other similar sections. But these voicemails weren't in public. In fact, George Chahal and CTV were the ones who published them, weren't they? Is it really likely to incite hatred where the breach of the peace is likely? Is it really? Against whom? The caller says the N word and then the F word for gays. But I think he's just using those as insults against George Chahal, who is neither gay nor black. I think the main thing is this angry, rude caller is just anti-liberal, I think. Again, I'm against all of this. I'm against mean voicemails. If someone who worked for me was leaving harassing voicemails like that with a Liberal MP, I'd fire the guy and say, come on, give your head a shake. What are you doing? But is that a hate crime under the criminal code? I just don't think so, at least not yet. I'm not for these kinds of calls, but it's hardly a crime to be rude. It's really just a slightly less polite version of what Justin Trudeau says about Albertans in the oil patch or about the unvaccinated on any given day.
If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people.
And now is the time for people who are still resistant to getting vaccinated to realize that that choice, which has consequences on putting our kids at risk, which has consequences at having us risk more lockdowns because they haven't chosen to get vaccinated yet, that there will be consequences for those people in not being able to go to a gym or a restaurant, not being able to go to a movie theater, not being able to get on a train or a plane. I want to stand up for the choice of those who are there for their neighbors, not those who are risking us all going into further lockdowns, of slowing our economic recovery. Trying to bring people together is not always compatible with science, with respect for human rights, with the best way to move things forward. I mean, when Aaron O'Toole talks about, oh yes, we need to unite people, we need to bring people together, he's talking about defending the rights of people who are anti-vax.
That's why we've been unequivocal. If you want to get on a plane or a train in the coming months, you're going to have to be fully vaccinated. So families with their kids don't have to worry that someone is going to put them in danger in the seat next to them or across the aisle.
Unfortunate that people who chose not to get vaccinated are now the ones clogging up our ICU systems and our hospital beds that should be available for people who did their work and did get vaccinated, making sure that businesses that choose to move forward with vaccination requirements aren't subject to unnecessary or unjustified lawsuits. If you make a choice, a personal choice, to not get vaccinated, then I will have no sympathy for you when you come to me and said, oh, but I can't go out to a restaurant with my friends, or I'm not being allowed to go to the gym, or my employer is telling me I have to continue to work from home. You don't have a right to endanger others.
And those people are putting us all at risk.
Yeah, a little less swearing there, but I think that's actually much more likely to cause a breach of the peace. That's a little more under that hate speech definition, isn't it, what Trudeau said? That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.